Late at night, under the harsh glow of the streetlights, a racist cop drags a black woman into court, certain he's about to make an example out of her. He mocks her, humiliates her, convinced he holds all the power. But there's one thing he doesn't know. She's an FBI agent. How will she turn the tables on the very system that tried to break her? And what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. The crisp evening air in Chicago carried a quiet hum of the city. Cars rolling by, footsteps echoing down the sidewalk, muffled conversations spilling from nearby cafes. But for Detective Carter Vaughn, the only thing he noticed was the black woman stepping out of an upscale law office on Riverside Drive. She was well-dressed, poised, and moving with confidence, like she belonged. And to him, that was the problem. Vaughn sat in his unmarked police car, gripping his lukewarm coffee as he narrowed his eyes at her. The radio crackled in the background, but he ignored it. He had been doing this job long enough to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him that a woman like her, black, alone, walking out of a law firm in a wealthy neighborhood, was up to something. No way she actually belongs here, he muttered under his breath. Vaughn adjusted his holster and stepped out of the car. His boots hit the pavement with purpose as he crossed the street, his eyes locked onto her. Olivia Mercer sensed him before he even spoke. Years of experience had trained her to recognize a watchful gaze, the weight of suspicion pressing against her like a storm cloud rolling in. She didn't flinch, didn't speed up. She simply walked toward her car, her posture steady. "Excuse me, ma'am," Vaughn called out, his tone flat but authoritative. Olivia stopped beside her sleek black BMW, her keys in hand. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Can I help you, officer?" Vaughn took a moment, sizing her up. No fear, no hesitation. That irritated him. Most people, especially black folks, got nervous when a cop approached them. But she stood there like she had nothing to be afraid of. "I need to see some ID," he said, stepping closer. Olivia arched an eyebrow. "May I ask why?" Vaughn let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "Because I said so." A few bystanders slowed their steps, their eyes flickering with interest as the conversation grew tense. Olivia knew better than to escalate, but she also knew her rights. "Detective, I haven't done anything suspicious. I just left a meeting. Unless you have reasonable suspicion, I don't have to show you anything." Vaughn's smirk tightened into a frown. "You think you know the law, huh?" Olivia didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them stretched, thick and charged. Vaughn could feel the eyes on him now, people watching, recording. He didn't like it. He was losing control of the situation, and he hated that. "Turn around," he snapped, hands on the car. A murmur rippled through the street. Olivia stayed rooted in place. "Are you seriously detaining me right now?" she asked, voice even, but laced with quiet authority. Vaughn clenched his jaw. "I said, hands on the damn car." She exhaled slowly before turning, placing her hands on the cold metal of her car door. Vaughn wasted no time yanking her arms behind her, locking cold steel around her wrists. Gasps echoed from the sidewalk. "You're making a mistake," Olivia said, her voice calm but firm. Vaughn tightened the cuffs just a little more than necessary. "We'll see about that." The drive to the station was silent, except for the faint hum of the police radio. Vaughn stole glances at Olivia through the rear-view mirror, waiting for her to panic, to beg, to say something that would confirm his suspicions. But she just sat there, still unreadable. That bothered him. "You must think you're special, huh?" he muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. Walking around like you own the damn place? Olivia didn't react. Vaughn scoffed. I've seen your type before. You act like the law doesn't apply to you. This time Olivia turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his through the mirror. And what type is that, detective? Her voice was measured, too measured. Vaughn didn't like it. The kind that thinks they can outsmart people like me, he sneered. Olivia leaned back against the seat, tilting her head slightly. That's interesting. Vaughn frowned. What the hell is that supposed to mean? A small, almost imperceptible smirk ghosted across Olivia's lips. You'll find out soon enough. The fluorescent lights in the precinct flickered slightly as Vaughn marched Olivia inside, keeping his grip tight on her arm. Officers glanced up as they passed, some exchanging curious looks. Sergeant Tom Brenner leaned against a desk, arms crossed. His eyes flicked between Vaughn and Olivia, something shifting in his expression. He had seen Vaughn pull this stunt before, but something about this felt different. What's the charge? Brenner asked. Vaughn shoved Olivia forward slightly. Fraud. Or maybe trespassing. Haven't decided yet. Brenner raised an eyebrow. You haven't decided. Vaughn shot him a glare. Just book her. Brenner didn't move. Instead, he looked at Olivia, taking in her calm demeanor, the way she carried herself, not like a suspect, but like someone who knew exactly what was happening. He frowned. What's your name? He asked her directly. For the first time, Olivia's lips curved into a small smile. You'll find out soon enough. Vaughn scoffed, shaking his head. Oh, sweetheart, you're not walking away from this one. Olivia simply met his gaze, steady and unwavering. Neither are you, detective. Vaughn froze, just for a second. And then, for the first time all night, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. The air inside the interrogation room was stale, heavy, with the lingering scent of burnt coffee and old paper. The flickering fluorescent light above cast a sickly glow over the dull gray walls, making the room feel even smaller than it was. Olivia Mercer sat at the cold metal table, her hands resting on the surface, cuffs still locked around her wrists. She breathed slowly, evenly, keeping her expression unreadable. This wasn't her first time in an interrogation room, but it was the first time she was sitting on this side of the table. Across from her, Detective Carter Vaughn leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, a smug smirk plastered on his face. He was enjoying this. The power, the control. This was his territory. You're awfully quiet, he mused, tapping a pen against his thigh. Most people in your position would be begging for a deal by now. Olivia didn't react. She just stared at him, her face calm, unreadable. Vaughn chuckled, shaking his head. You really think you're something special, huh? Walking around like the rules don't apply to you. Let me tell you something. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into something almost mocking. That attitude, it doesn't work in here. Still, Olivia said nothing. Vaughn let out an exaggerated sigh, flipping open a manila folder in front of him. He scanned the pages inside. Phony charges, fabricated witness statements, a weak attempt to frame her for something, anything. Let's see, he drawled, tapping his finger against the file. Possible fraud, trespassing, or my personal favorite, resisting arrest. He glanced up, expecting her to flinch, to react in some way. But she didn't even blink. That irritated him. Vaughn slammed the folder shut. You got nothing to say for yourself? Olivia tilted her head slightly, finally breaking her silence. What exactly is it you think I did, detective? Vaughn smirked, as if he had been waiting for her to speak. Oh, I don't have to think, sweetheart. I know. People like you always have something to hide. People like me? Olivia repeated, her tone carefully neutral. Vaughn scoffed. You know exactly what I mean. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. The door creaked open, and Sergeant Tom Brenner stepped inside. He wasn't supposed to be here, but something about this whole situation wasn't sitting right with him. What's going on? Brenner asked, his eyes flicking between Vaughn and Olivia. Vaughn rolled his eyes, just handling an uncooperative suspect. Brenner frowned, studying Olivia. She didn't look like the type to get caught up in something like this, and she definitely didn't look worried. Uncooperative? Brenner repeated. Or just not saying what you want to hear. Vaughn shot him a glare. Do you mind? I'm in the middle of something. Brenner didn't move. Instead, he turned to Olivia. Ma'am, do you need a lawyer? Vaughn let out a laugh. Oh, come on. She doesn't need a lawyer. She needs to start talking. Olivia simply smiled. You should listen to him, detective. Vaughn's smirk faltered, just slightly. Brenner's frown deepened. He didn't like this. Something felt off. Vaughn, so what's the actual charge? Brenner asked, arms crossed. Vaughn waved a hand. Like I said, fraud. Maybe trespassing. Brenner arched an eyebrow. Maybe? Vaughn's jaw tightened. Look, just go back to your desk, Brenner. Brenner didn't budge. He could feel something brewing, something bigger than Vaughn realized. And judging by the way Olivia was sitting there, completely unshaken, Vaughn was about to find out the hard way. A knock on the door interrupted them. Another officer stepped inside, holding a file. He looked nervous. Detective Vaughn? The judge is ready. Vaughn grinned, grabbing Olivia by the arm and yanking her to her feet. Showtime. But as he pulled her toward the door, Olivia spoke, her voice cool and steady. Are you sure you want to do this, detective? Vaughn stopped for just a second, just long enough for doubt to creep in. Brenner saw it, and so did Olivia. And that was when Vaughn should have realized something was very, very wrong. The courtroom buzzed with quiet conversation as people shuffled into their seats, a mix of officers, attorneys, reporters, and curious onlookers. The weight of what was about to happen hung in the air like a thick fog. At the defendant's table, Olivia Mercer sat with perfect posture, her expression unreadable. The cuffs had been removed, but her wrists still bore the faint red marks where Detective Carter Vaughn had tightened them too hard. Across the room, Vaughn stood tall, hands in his pockets, confidence radiating off him. He loved moments like this, when the power was all his. To him, this was just another case, another day in court, where his word as a veteran detective would be more than enough to take down someone like her. The judge's gavel hit the bench, silencing the murmurs. Court is now in session. The People versus Mercer. Vaughn smirked. No way she's walking out of here today, he muttered under his breath. The prosecutor, a sharp-looking man in his 40s, stood. Your Honor, we have reason to believe that the defendant, Olivia Mercer, was involved in a fraudulent financial scheme. Judge Evelyn Ross barely looked up as she flipped through the file in front of her. Olivia noticed something. The judge's eyes lingered on a particular page, her fingers tapping lightly against the paper. Then she looked up, this time, really looked, directly at Olivia. Miss Mercer, would you like to respond to these charges? The judge asked, her voice calm but pointed. Olivia folded her hands on the table, tilting her head slightly. That depends, Your Honor. Would you like to continue this farce, or should we go ahead and end it now? A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. Vaughn scoffed loudly. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Playing tough, huh? Let's see how that works out for you." The judge ignored him, her gaze never leaving Olivia. "Miss Mercer, are you saying these charges are false?" A slow smile spread across Olivia's lips. She reached into the inside pocket of her blazer, moving deliberately. The room tensed. Even Vaughn straightened up slightly. And then, she placed something on the table. A gold badge. The room fell into absolute silence. Vaughn blinked. The prosecutor's mouth slightly parted, his breath catching. The judge, however, simply exhaled through her nose, as if she had suspected it all along. Olivia leaned forward, her voice smooth and steady. "Special Agent Olivia Mercer, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Vaughn staggered back a step. "Bullshit," he blurted out, his voice suddenly hoarse. Olivia tilted her head, looking him up and down, like a predator sizing up weak prey. "Detective Vaughn, I was wondering how long it would take you to realize you arrested the wrong woman." The prosecutor swallowed hard, flipping through the case file in panic, realizing they had just tried to prosecute a high-ranking FBI agent. The judge's eyes darkened, her patience clearly worn thin. "Detective Vaughn," she said, her voice sharp and authoritative, "approach the bench. Now." Vaughn hesitated. For the first time he wasn't sure what to do. The judge's voice cut through the silence again. "I said now." With stiff movements, Vaughn walked forward, his jaw clenched. The judge leaned in, her voice now low enough that only Vaughn, the prosecutor, and Olivia could hear. "Tell me, detective, did you even bother running a background check before bringing her in?" Vaughn's lips parted, but no words came. "Did you know she was an FBI agent?" Vaughn clenched his fists. I didn't." The judge's expression darkened. "Of course you didn't." She turned to Olivia. "Agent Mercer, do you wish to proceed with charges?" Olivia's gaze flicked toward Vaughn, who now looked pale, sweat forming at his brow. She could end him right here. She could make this a career-ending moment for him. And then she smiled, slow and deliberate. "Not yet, Your Honor." Vaughn's chest rose and fell rapidly as he processed her words. "Not yet." That meant something worse was coming. Judge Ross nodded. "Then this court sees no reason for these proceedings to continue. Agent Mercer, you are free to go." Olivia stood smoothly, adjusting her blazer. But as she stepped away from the table, she turned back toward Vaughn, stepping dangerously close. "You were so sure, weren't you?" she murmured. "So sure that I was just another black woman you could humiliate. Just another case for you to stack on your record." Vaughn's breath was shaky, his once powerful stance now unsteady. Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper now, but every word hit him like a bullet. "I hope you enjoyed this moment, detective, because it's the last time you'll ever have power over me." She turned and walked away. Vaughn was left standing there, drowning in the weight of his own mistake, and that was when the real panic set in. The courtroom emptied quickly, reporters scrambling outside, their cameras flashing as they rushed to break the story. But Vaughn didn't move. He stood there, staring blankly at the empty defense table where Olivia had sat just moments ago. Then the side door opened, and 3 men in dark suits walked in. FBI. Vaughn's stomach plummeted. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense expression, pulled out a folder and flipped it open. "Detective Vaughn," he said, his voice flat and professional. "We need to talk." Vaughn swallowed hard. "About what?" The agent glanced up, expression unreadable. "About your history of falsified arrests, planted evidence, and civil rights violations." Vaughn's blood ran cold. The judge was still seated, watching with quiet satisfaction, as reality sank in for Vaughn. This wasn't just about today. This had been coming for a long time. As Vaughn was escorted out of the courtroom, Olivia watched from the side, arms crossed. She had let him walk into his own destruction, and now his world was about to come crashing down. The courtroom was nearly empty now. The reporters had rushed outside, eager to break the story of a corrupt detective arresting an FBI agent on false charges. The echoes of their hurried footsteps had faded, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. But Detective Carter Vaughn wasn't alone. He stood frozen, his chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths. His mind raced, but no excuse, no defense, no clever way out came to him. His usual confidence, the cocky smirk, the arrogant posture, was gone. Because standing in front of him were 3 federal agents. The lead agent, a tall man in a crisp suit, flipped open a thick file and glanced at Vaughn. His expression was unreadable, his voice smooth, controlled. "Detective Vaughn," he said, "you need to come with us." Vaughn's throat felt dry. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Come with you?" he repeated, his voice hoarse. "For what?" The agent lifted his gaze from the file, his eyes locking onto Vaughn's, with an intensity that made his stomach drop. "For the mountain of civil rights violations, falsified reports, and planted evidence tied to your name." A ringing noise filled Vaughn's ears. This couldn't be happening. "That's bullshit," he spat, his voice sharper than he intended. "I did my job." The agent didn't flinch. He simply turned a page in the file and continued, his tone unwavering. "Your job. Let's talk about your job, detective." He flipped to another page, then read aloud. "Case file number 2046. Subject: DeAndre Ellis, 19 years old. No criminal record. Arrested under your orders for loitering with intent outside a convenience store. Released without charge after 48 hours. No official report filed." Vaughn felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The agent flipped another page. Case file number 3782. Subject: Luis Mendoza, 17 years old. Detained on suspicion of theft. Held for 2 nights. No evidence presented. Charges quietly dropped. Another page. Case file number 5199. Subject: Olivia Mercer. Vaughn flinched. "Now, this one's interesting," the agent continued, "because this time, you didn't just pick up a random black woman off the street. You picked up a federal agent. And that, Detective Vaughn, is where your luck ran out." Silence. Vaughn shook his head violently, trying to find the right words. "No, no, no. You don't understand. She was acting suspicious. I was doing my job." Olivia, who had been watching quietly from the side, finally stepped forward. "Your job?" she said, her voice calm, almost amused. "Tell me, detective, when exactly did your job become about fabricating crimes against people who look like me?" Vaughn turned sharply toward her. His face was red now, frustration boiling over. "You set me up," he snapped. "This was a goddamn setup." Olivia tilted her head, her expression unshaken. "You really think you needed my help ruining your career? You did that all on your own." Vaughn opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because he knew she was right. The agent in front of him sighed, then pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Detective Vaughn, you are under federal investigation. You need to come with us, now." For the first time in his career, Vaughn was the one facing arrest, the one being humiliated, the one who had no power. His eyes darted across the rooms, looking for someone, anyone, who might step in, who might defend him. But the officers who had once laughed at his jokes, covered for his excessive force, turned a blind eye to his corruption. They weren't stepping up now. They were staying silent, just like they had when he had dragged innocent people into holding cells. Now, it was his turn to be on the other side of that silence. Vaughn's nostrils flared as his body tensed, his pride screaming at him not to go quietly. But the cold, hard truth was settling in. He had no choice. The agent motioned toward his wrists. "Turn around." For the first time in his life, Vaughn felt fear clawing at his chest. He turned slowly, his breath shallow, and felt the bite of cold steel as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The weight of it hit him like a freight train. He was done. The courtroom doors swung open as Vaughn was led outside, his hands cuffed behind his back. And waiting for him was the press. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched out. Reporters swarmed like vultures. "Detective Vaughn, do you have anything to say? Is it true you've been under investigation for months? Did you know Agent Mercer was with the FBI before you arrested her?" Vaughn kept his head down, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Olivia. She was standing off to the side, watching, arms crossed. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just the calm, knowing gaze of someone who had seen this coming. Vaughn's blood boiled. "This isn't over," he growled under his breath as he passed her. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Oh, but it is." And just like that, Vaughn was shoved into the back of a federal SUV. The door slammed shut, sealing him inside. Hours later, Vaughn sat in a cold, dimly lit interrogation room. But this time, he wasn't in control. No smug grin, no power. Just him and the four walls of his new reality. A door opened. Olivia stepped in. She took a seat across from him, studying him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Do you get it now?" she asked, her voice steady. Vaughn stared at her, his face twisted in something between rage and disbelief. "You think this makes you better than me?" he spat. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Olivia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No, Vaughn. I think I'm the one who finally stopped you." She stood, smoothing out her jacket. "Enjoy your retirement." Then she walked out, leaving Carter Vaughn alone, for the first time in his life, truly powerless, and he knew. This time, there was no coming back. The news spread like wildfire. By morning, Detective Carter Vaughn's name was splashed across every major network. "Chicago cop, arrested for civil rights violations." The headlines screamed. "FBI agent turns the tables on corrupt officer." The footage of Vaughn being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs played on an endless loop, a symbol of long overdue justice. Inside the Chicago Police Department, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered in hushed tones. Some were relieved, others angry. But no one was surprised. They all knew what Vaughn was. At her desk, Sergeant Tom Brenner scrolled through his phone, reading the news updates. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Took long enough," he muttered. Across town, Olivia Mercer stood before a row of reporters, microphones angled toward her. "Agent Mercer, do you believe Vaughn was acting alone?" a journalist called out. Olivia met their gaze without hesitation. "No," she said simply. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. "Then what happens next?" another reporter asked. Olivia let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. "This isn't just about one bad cop. This is about an entire system that let him operate unchecked for years. That ends now." More flashes, more questions. But Olivia had said enough. She turned and walked away. She wasn't done, not even close. In a small, sterile holding cell, Vaughn sat on a metal bench, his head in his hands. His career, his reputation, everything was gone. The door opened, and a familiar voice echoed through the room. "How's it feel, Detective?" Vaughn looked up sharply. Olivia stood just inside the doorway, arms crossed. "You think you won," he spat, his voice rough. Olivia took a slow step forward. "No, Vaughn, I didn't have to win. You lost all on your own." He let out a bitter laugh. "This is political bullshit. You know it. The department's just throwing me under the bus to cover their own asses." Olivia studied him for a long moment. "Maybe," she admitted, "but you still deserve to be here." Vaughn scoffed, shaking his head. "You think locking me up is going to change anything? Cops like me are everywhere. You can't clean up this mess." Olivia's expression didn't waver. "Number, but I can sure as hell start." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Vaughn?" He looked up. "You picked the wrong one." And with that, she walked out, leaving Vaughn alone in the cold, empty cell. For the first time, there was no way out. This story isn't just about one corrupt cop getting what he deserved. It's about the power of accountability. Detective Vaughn was able to operate unchecked for years because a system protected him, not because he was untouchable. But the moment he targeted the wrong person, someone who refused to be intimidated, his entire world collapsed. So, what can we take away from this? Know your rights. Olivia never panicked because she understood the law. Knowledge is power. If you know your rights, no one can take advantage of you. Corruption thrives in silence. Vaughn got away with his actions for years because people around him either ignored it or were too afraid to speak up. Change happens when people refuse to stay silent. One voice can make a difference. Olivia stood her ground, and in doing so, she didn't just expose Vaughn. She forced a system to reckon with itself. We might not all be FBI agents, but we all have the ability to hold power accountable. By speaking up, by demanding justice, and by never allowing fear to silence us. Because as Olivia proved, the only way to lose is to do nothing. Now, if you were in her shoes, what would you do? Press 1. If you would stand up and fight for justice, even knowing the risks. Press 2. If you would stay quiet and avoid trouble, believing that some battles are too big to win. Drop 1 or 2 in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to support the channel. Let's keep these conversations going and stand up for what's right.